My brother told me I could come to his engagement dinner. He just forgot to mention I'd be using the service elevator. He was marrying media royalty, and my existence didn't fit his brand. So, I attended the most important night of his life wearing a catering apron. The smell of stale fryer oil and bleach is impossible to wash out. It gets into your cuticles. It settles in the roots of your hair. I was scrubbing the stainless steel prep counter at Carmine's, a mid-tier Italian joint where I worked the line when Colin walked in. He didn't belong in the kitchen. Not anymore. Colin smelled like vetiver and dry-cleaned wool. He wore a navy suit that draped over his shoulders with the kind of effortless precision that only comes from dropping $3,000 at a tailor. The harsh fluorescent lights caught the subtle gleam of his watch. He looked like a stranger, which, honestly, he mostly was these days. "Gemma," he said. His voice was tight. He didn't hug me. He didn't even step fully into the kitchen, keeping his expensive Italian loafers firmly on the linoleum boundary line. "Colin," I replied, tossing my rag into a gray plastic bus tub. The wet slap echoed in the empty kitchen. "We're closed. If you want a lukewarm calzone, you're 10 minutes too late." He didn't smile. He shifted his weight, his eyes darting to the greasy exhaust hoods before landing back on me. "I need a favor. A big one." I crossed my arms. The apron strings dug into the back of my neck, damp with sweat. "You need money?" "Because I've got about $40 in my checking account and a car that makes a sound like a dying lawnmower." "No," he said quickly, almost offended. "Not money. It's about the dinner on Friday, the engagement dinner." My stomach gave a little lurch. Colin was marrying Fiona Hayes. Fiona was polished, bred for charity galas, and floated through life on a cloud of generational wealth. I had received a thick, cream-colored invitation in the mail 3 weeks ago. I had already bought a dress, a dark green slip dress from a thrift store that I'd painstakingly tailored myself. "What about it?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. Colin reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out a thick, white envelope. He set it on the cold steel of the prep counter. He didn't slide it toward me. He just left it there, a physical barrier between us. "Fiona's father is coming," Colin said. His voice dropped half an octave. "Harrison Hayes. The news guy. Yeah, I know. You've mentioned it 4 times. He's old school, Gemma. He's obsessed with legacy, pedigree. He's spent his entire career interrogating politicians, digging into backgrounds. He's already skeptical of me. A guy from a nowhere town with no trust fund." Colin swallowed hard. I watched his Adam's apple bob. I told him my family was in real estate management, that our parents passed away and left us a modest estate. The silence in the kitchen was sudden and heavy, broken only by the low, mechanical hum of the walk-in refrigerator. Our dad drove a forklift. Our mom worked the register at a pharmacy until her heart gave out. There was no estate. There was a trailer in Ohio that the bank repossessed 6 years ago. "Okay," I said slowly, tasting pennies in the back of my mouth. "So you lied." "I embellished," he corrected smoothly, the PR training kicking in. "But if you show up and he starts asking you questions, Gemma, you have a burn scar on your arm from a deep fryer. You drop your G's when you talk fast. You're..." He gestured to me, taking in my messy bun, the flour on my jeans, the tiredness in my posture. "I'm what, Colin? Embarrassing?" "Real," he said, though it sounded like a curse word. "You're too real, and Harrison will chew that up. He'll see right through me, and he'll convince Fiona to call off the wedding." I stared at the envelope on the counter. "So, you're uninviting me?" "No," he said eagerly. Too eagerly. "I'm repurposing you." My caterer backed out. A sudden salmonella outbreak at their facility. "I am desperate, Gemma. I need someone who can cook a 5-star meal, plate it, and serve it seamlessly. I need you." He wanted me there, just not as his sister. He wanted me pouring his wine and clearing his dirty plates so he could play the part of the refined, self-made prince. I should have thrown the wet rag at his face. I should have told him to choke on his own ambition. The anger flared in my chest, hot and bright, but it died just as quickly, smothered by a heavy, familiar exhaustion. I was 28, tired of fighting and tired of being broke. I looked at the envelope. How much? Colin blinked, momentarily thrown that I wasn't screaming. $3,000. Cash. $3,000. That was my transmission. That was 3 months of rent. That was breathing room. I reached out and touched the envelope. The paper was thick, textured, expensive. What's the menu? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of whatever sibling affection we had left. Colin let out a breath he'd been holding, his shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. I'll email you. Just don't speak unless spoken to. And if anyone asks, your name is Anna. Anna, I repeated, the name tasting like ash. Got it. See you Friday, Mr. Davis. He winced at the formality, but he didn't apologize. He just turned and walked out, the heavy metal door swinging shut behind him, leaving me alone with the smell of bleach and the cold comfort of cash. Colin's penthouse was a monument to things you couldn't touch. It was all floor-to-ceiling glass, stark white walls, and furniture that looked like modern art sculptures rather than places to sit. When I stepped out of the service elevator on Friday afternoon, carrying 2 massive canvas bags of groceries, the silence of the place hit me. It was a vacuum, no draft, no street noise from the city below, just climate-controlled perfection. I hauled the bags into the kitchen. The countertops were a brutalist slab of matte black marble. The appliances were German, seamless, and completely unused. The oven looked like it belonged on a spacecraft. I unpacked mechanically. Fingerling potatoes, a massive cut of dry-aged beef tenderloin, bunches of fresh thyme, rosemary, and sage, heirloom carrots still dusted with organic dirt. The smell of the herbs immediately clashed with the sterile, citrus-scented air of the apartment. I liked that. I crushed a sprig of rosemary between my thumb and forefinger just to make the kitchen smell alive. I tied my apron a crisp, black, professional bib that Colin had messengered to me yesterday. No name tag. At 4 o'clock, the front door clicked open, and the faint, rhythmic clicking of heels echoed down the hallway. Colin, darling? The florist sent peonies, and I specifically said white orchids. Fiona walked into the kitchen. She stopped short when she saw me. She was undeniably beautiful. Slender, with glossy blonde hair that looked like it had never known a split end, and skin that glowed with expensive serums. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that draped perfectly. "Oh," she said, her voice dropping its frantic edge, replacing it with a cool, polite detachment. "You must be the replacement catering girl, Anna, right?" "Yes," I said, keeping my hands resting on the cutting board. "I'm Anna." Thank God. Colin told me the other company had a biohazard issue. Horrific. She shuddered delicately. She didn't step fully into the kitchen. She hovered at the edge of the marble island, eyeing the raw meat with mild distaste. "Listen, my father has a very sensitive palate. He likes his meat medium rare. Not rare, not medium. If it bleeds too much on the plate, he won't eat it. And the wine needs to breathe for exactly 45 minutes before pouring." "Understood," I said. She looked at me, really looked at me for a second. Her gaze dropped to my hands. My knuckles were red from washing dishes, my nails cut short and unpainted. A small healed burn mark sat on the back of my left wrist. She didn't look disgusted, just disconnected. Like she was looking at a wrench or a vacuum cleaner. A tool. "Could you get me a sparkling water?" she asked, already turning her back to check her reflection in the glass of the oven door. "Lime, no ice." I pulled a bottle from the massive refrigerator, sliced a lime with a sharp, satisfying thwack of my chef's knife, and handed her the glass. Our fingers brushed. Hers were icy cold and soft. Mine were rough. "Thanks," she murmured, walking away without looking at me again. I turned back to the cutting board. My jaw ached. I realized I was clenching my teeth so hard the muscles in my temples throbbed. I grabbed a shallot and began to dice it. The knife moved in a blur, fine, perfect squares piling up. The sharp, sulfurous smell of the onion stung my eyes, giving me a convenient excuse for the sudden, hot moisture gathering in my lash line. Colin arrived an hour later. He looked frantic. He had changed into a dark charcoal suit, no tie, the top two buttons of his shirt undone in a calculated display of casual elegance. He strode into the kitchen, his eyes darting to the pots on the stove, the prepped salads, the wine breathing on the counter. "Is it ready? Are we on schedule?" he demanded in a harsh whisper, grabbing a towel to wipe an invisible spot off the marble counter. "The beef is resting. The potatoes are roasting. The reduction is simmering," I said evenly. I stirred the dark, glossy red wine demi-glace with a wooden spoon. The rich smell of beef fat and marrow filled the air. "Did you talk to Fiona?" he asked, looking panicked. I poured her a water. "Don't worry, Colin. My peasant accent didn't rub off on her silk dress." He flinched, closing his eyes for a second. "Gemma, please, don't do this right now. My stomach is in knots. Harrison will be here any minute. Just keep your head down. Please." "My name is Anna tonight," I reminded him, tapping the wooden spoon against the edge of the saucepan. Tap, tap. The sound was loud in the tense kitchen. "Go be a prince, Colin. I'll handle the food." He looked at me, a flicker of genuine guilt crossing his face, but he buried it quickly. He nodded once, spun around, and walked back to his new life. I turned the heat down on the stove, listening to the gentle bubbling of the sauce, and waited for the anchor to drop. The doorbell chimed. It wasn't a harsh buzz. It was a soft, melodic tone that sounded like money. From my position in the kitchen, hidden behind the architectural curve of the dividing wall, I could hear the front door open. "Harrison," Colin's voice boomed, overly hearty, projecting confidence he didn't feel. "Welcome. Come in. Come in." "Colin." The voice sent a physical vibration through the floorboards. I had heard that voice 100 times on television, breaking down global conflicts and interviewing heads of state, but in person, it was a weapon. It was deep, gravelly, and commanded absolute attention. There was no warmth in it. "Dad!" Fiona chirped, her heels clicking rapidly. I heard the rustle of an embrace. "I'm so glad you made it." "Wouldn't miss it, Fee," Harrison Hayes replied, though traffic on the FDR was a spectacular failure of urban planning. "You have a nice place here, Colin. A bit sterile for my taste, but it has altitude." "Thank you, sir," Colin said. I could practically hear him sweating. "Shall we sit?" Harrison suggested. It wasn't a request. I counted to 60, letting them get settled in the dining area. The dining table was a massive piece of live-edge walnut, positioned under a modern chandelier that looked like a cluster of floating glass shards. I picked up the tray of hors d'oeuvres, endive spears with whipped goat cheese, candied pecans, and a fig balsamic glaze. I smoothed my apron, took a deep breath that tasted of roasted garlic, and walked out of the kitchen. I kept my eyes focused on the center of the table as I approached. "Ah, the catering," Harrison noted as I set the tray down in the middle of the table. I stepped back, pulling the wine bottle from the chiller on the sideboard. I moved to Fiacna first, pouring exactly 3 ounces. Then Colin. His hands were folded on his lap, rigid. He didn't look at me. Then I moved to Harrison. He was an imposing man. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, jawline like a granite cliff, wearing a tailored tweed blazer that looked comfortably lived in, a stark contrast to Colin's stiff suit. As I poured the wine, I felt his eyes on me. Not in a predatory way, but with the cold, calculating observation of a journalist. "Thank you, young woman," he rumbled. "You're welcome, sir," I murmured, keeping my head slightly bowed, playing the part. I retreated to the shadows of the kitchen doorway, holding a white linen napkin, waiting. The dining room was dimly lit, the chandelier throwing fractured light across their faces. "So, Colin," Harrison began, cutting into an endive spear with his fork. The silver scraped against the porcelain. "Fiona tells me you closed the merger with the Sterling Group last week. Impressive." "It was a team effort, sir," Colin deflected smoothly. "But yes, a significant win for the firm." "Modesty," Harrison mused, taking a slow sip of the wine. He swirled it in his glass, watching the dark liquid coat the crystal, a rare trait in investment banking, or a calculated one. "Tell me about your parents." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I gripped the linen napkin in my hands, twisting it tightly around my knuckles. My parents? Colin asked, his voice tight. Yes. The estate managers in upstate New York. It's fascinating work, estate management. Requires a deep understanding of land, of legacy. Where exactly were they based? I know the Hudson Valley quite well. Colin took a sip of his wine, buying time. His throat worked, mostly near. Rhinebeck, he lied. Private estates, old families. They preferred to keep things discreet. Rhinebeck, Harrison repeated. The word rolled around in his mouth like he was tasting it for poison. Did they work for the Astor properties? Or perhaps the Montgomerys? I did a piece on the Montgomery Family Trust a decade ago. It was a smaller private consortium, Colin backpedaled. They passed when I was quite young, honestly. I don't have many of the operational details. Tragic, Harrison said. But his eyes were sharp. They were locked on Colin like a hawk watching a field mouse. And you have no other family? No siblings? I stopped breathing. The silence stretched. The low hum of the city outside seemed to amplify. I looked at the back of Colin's head. His neck was flushed red just above his collar. No, Colin said. The word was flat, finalized. A tombstone. Just me. A cold, heavy stone dropped in my stomach. I knew he had requested this. I knew I was getting paid for this. But hearing him say it, hearing him verbally erase me from existence to this stranger, felt like a physical blow. The money in my bag suddenly felt dirty. I stepped forward to clear the appetizer plates. My movements were robotic. I reached for Colin's plate first. As I leaned over, my sleeve pulled back slightly, exposing the pale skin of my inner wrist and a small, faded tattoo of a swallow, a matching tattoo Colin and I had gotten when I turned 18. Colin saw it. He flinched, pulling his arm back slightly, knocking his heavy crystal water goblet. The glass tipped. Water spilled across the polished walnut, soaking into the pristine white table runner. Damn it, Colin hissed, grabbing his napkin to dab frantically at the water. I've got it, sir, I said, my voice deadpan. I stepped in with my own cloth, wiping up the spill efficiently. Harrison Hayes was silent. He wasn't looking at the spill. He was looking at Colin's panicked reaction, and then, slowly, his gaze shifted up to me. His eyes were a pale, icy blue. They took in my face, the tension in my jaw, the deliberate way I avoided looking at Colin. I saw his gaze flick to my wrist, noticing the tattoo before I pulled my sleeve down. You handled that with practiced ease, Harrison said to me, his voice a low rumble. Hazards of the job, sir, I replied evenly, stacking the plates on my arm. How long have you worked for this catering company, he asked. Colin shifted violently in his seat. Harrison, really, we shouldn't interrogate the staff. I asked the young woman a question, Colin, Harrison said, not raising his voice, but the authority in it effectively silenced my brother. Harrison turned back to me. Well? I stood there, holding the dirty plates of the brother who had just claimed he was an only child. I looked at Colin. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, silently begging. $3,000, his eyes said. Don't ruin this. I looked back at Harrison, the famous anchor, the man obsessed with truth. Tonight is my first night, sir, I said, my voice steady. I'm a freelancer. A freelancer, Harrison repeated softly. He leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingertips together. Fascinating. Bring out the main course, Anna. Let's see what else you can deliver. I turned and walked back to the kitchen. My hands were shaking so hard the plates rattled together, a harsh, brittle sound that followed me into the dark. The kitchen felt like a pressurized cabin. I stood over the stove, basting the tenderloin medallions with foaming, browned butter and bruised sprigs of thyme. The butter hissed and popped, spitting tiny droplets of grease onto my bare forearms. I didn't flinch. The minor burns grounded me. They were real. Everything on the other side of the dividing wall was a fabrication. I arranged the plates with mechanical precision. A swipe of the dark, glossy demi-glace, the perfectly rested meat, crusted with coarse sea salt, a neat stack of roasted fingerling potatoes. It was beautiful food, the kind of food I could never afford to eat. I wiped the rims of the heavy porcelain plates with a damp cloth, loaded 3 onto a massive oval serving tray, and hoisted it onto my shoulder. My rubber-soled kitchen shoes squeaked faintly against the imported hardwood as I walked back into the dining room. The temperature in the room had plummeted. Colin was leaning forward, elbows on the table, a rigid smile plastered on his face. Harrison sat perfectly back in his chair, his posture immaculate, watching my brother with the detached interest of a biologist observing a struggling insect under glass. Fiona was inspecting her cuticles. The main course, I announced, my voice sounding thin and reedy over the low hum of the air conditioning. I served Fiona first. She looked at the steak, picked up her fork, and prodded the center of the meat. A tiny pool of pink juice seeped out. She sighed, a delicate, disappointed sound. It's a bit vibrant, isn't it, Colin? I told you Dad prefers a harder sear. It's rested properly, I said, before Colin could apologize. The words slipped out, a chef's reflex. The internal temperature is exactly 135 degrees. It will melt. Fiona stopped prodding. She looked up at me, her brow furrowing slightly, as if the toaster had just spoken. Harrison chuckled. It was a low, dry sound, a chef who defends her work. Good. I abhor a sycophant. I'll be the judge, Anna. He picked up his knife. The heavy silver scraped against the plate. He cut a piece, chewed slowly, and swallowed. I stood frozen in the corner of the room, the empty serving tray pressed against my hip like a shield. Perfectly executed, Harrison declared, taking a sip of his red wine. He looked right at me. You have a remarkable palate. Did you train locally? Just working the line, sir. Hands-on experience, I said, staring at the bridge of his nose to avoid his pale eyes. Fascinating, Harrison mused. He turned his attention back to Colin. Colin, you were telling me about the summers at the estate. It must have been quite a cultural shift, moving to the city for college. The isolation of private land to the density of Manhattan. Colin cleared his throat. He reached for his wine glass. His hand was trembling, just a fraction, but the surface of the dark wine vibrated, betraying him. It was an adjustment, sir. But I've always been adaptable. And your parents? What did they do in their leisure time? Estate management is a demanding life, but there must have been moments of respite. Colin swallowed hard. He looked at Fiona for a lifeline, but she was busy surgically removing a thyme leaf from her potato. He was on his own. He was improvising, and he was terrible at it. My mother, Colin started, his voice a pitch too high. She was an avid gardener, and she played tennis. The family she worked for allowed her to use the clay courts on the property. She loved the whites, the whole aesthetic. My lungs stopped working. The air just refused to enter my chest. Tennis. Our mother had a permanently bruised tailbone from slipping on a wet floor at the pharmacy. She wore orthopedic shoes that smelled like foot powder and despair. Her hands were permanently stained blue from the cheap dye in the denim jeans she bought at a discount warehouse. Her idea of leisure was falling asleep in a recliner with a heating pad strapped to her lower back, watching reruns of Jeopardy, because the sound of Alex Trebek's voice made her feel safe. She didn't know what a clay court was. She had never owned a piece of white clothing that didn't immediately turn gray in our shared, coin-operated laundry machine in the trailer park. A hot, sick wave of pure rage rolled through my stomach. It wasn't the kind of anger that makes you yell. It was the kind that makes your vision tunnel. It was the absolute crushing realization that Colin didn't just want to hide our past. He found our mother's actual, brutal, exhausting life so shameful that he had to invent a country club ghost to replace her. Tennis? Harrison repeated softly. He wasn't eating anymore. He was watching Colin. Then he looked at Colin's left wrist. Colin had his sleeves rolled up earlier, but had buttoned them down before dinner. As he reached for the salt shaker, the cuff rode up just an inch. Tell me, Colin, Harrison said, his voice dropping into that terrifying authoritative register he used for hostile interviews. When did you get the laser removal? Colin froze. The salt shaker hovered over his plate. Sir? The scar on your left wrist, Harrison pointed with his heavy silver fork. It's faint, but I know what a lasered tattoo looks like. I spent 2 months embedded with a gang unit in Los Angeles. You learn to read skin. It looks like the ghost of a bird. A swallow, perhaps? Fiona looked up, finally interested. A tattoo? Colin, you never told me you had a tattoo. You hate tattoos. It was a mistake, Colin stammered, his face draining of color, leaving him looking like a wax figure. From college. A fraternity dare. I had it removed years ago. Harrison didn't look at Colin. Slowly, deliberately, the veteran anchor turned his head. His pale, icy eyes locked onto me, standing in the shadows by the kitchen door. He had seen my wrist when I wiped up the spilled water. He had seen the small blue ink swallow, the matching swallow. The silence in the room became violently heavy. The clinking of silverware stopped. The hum of the refrigerator in the other room sounded like a jet engine. Harrison Hayes put the pieces together in real time. I could practically see the tumblers clicking into place behind his eyes. The tension in the air was so thick, you could carve it with a steak knife. Anna, Harrison said. My fake name sounded absurd in his mouth. Yes, sir, I whispered. My throat felt like it was coated in sand. Come here. Pour me a little more wine, please. Colin shot up from his chair. Harrison, let me. The staff shouldn't. Sit down, Colin, Harrison commanded. He didn't yell. He just cracked the whip of his voice, and Colin fell back into his chair, utterly defeated. I walked forward. My legs felt hollow. I picked up the heavy crystal decanter. As I leaned over to pour the wine into Harrison's glass, he casually reached out and tapped his index finger against my left forearm. Pull up your sleeve, please, he requested softly. Fiona gasped. Dad, you can't just ask the help to undress. I'm not asking the help, Harrison said, never taking his eyes off mine. I'm asking his sister. The wine decanter shook in my hand. A single heavy drop of dark red liquid detached from the crystal lip and fell onto the pristine white linen tablecloth. It didn't just sit there, it aggressively soaked into the fibers, blooming outward like a sudden violent bruise. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. That one stain felt louder than anything anyone could say. Colin let out a sound, a high, thin exhalation that sounded like a tire losing air. He put his head in his hands, his fingers digging into his perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive cut. Sister? Fiona's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy air. She set her fork down. The silver clattered harshly against the porcelain. She looked between the three of us, her perfectly manicured face twisting not in horror, but in profound irritation. Dad, what are you talking about? Colin doesn't have a sister. His parents died in upstate New York, he told me. I looked down at Harrison. The veteran newsman wasn't gloating. He didn't have the smug satisfaction of a reporter breaking a scandal. He just looked incredibly tired. He looked like a man who had dug through the dirt, expecting to find treasure, and only found more dirt. The ice in his blue eyes had melted into something worse. Pity. I set the decanter down on the table. The crystal base made a dull thud. I didn't pull up my sleeve. There was no point anymore. The charade was dead, bleeding out right there next to the medium-rare beef. Her name isn't Anna, Harrison said to his daughter, his voice taking on a gentle, paternal edge. Is it Colin? Colin didn't answer. He just stared at the mahogany grain of the table, his shoulders shaking slightly under the tailored wool of his suit jacket. I looked at my brother. I looked at the panic radiating from him, the absolute paralyzing terror of losing his grip on this fabricated golden ladder. For a fraction of a second, an old, pathetic instinct flared up inside me, the older sister instinct. Fix it for him. Take the blame. Tell them you're a crazy stalker. I hated him in that moment, but looking at him so small, so completely unmasked in his own 40-story fortress, I also pitied him. He had spent so much energy running away from our life that he had completely forgotten how to stand on solid ground. My name is Gemma, I said. My voice was loud in the quiet room. It didn't shake. The fear that had been humming in my veins all night was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy exhaustion that settled deep in my marrow. Fiona stood up. The silk of her dress rustled, an expensive sound. Colin, is this a joke? Who is this person? Why is the caterer claiming to be your family? Colin finally raised his head. His face was splotchy, the skin tight around his mouth. He looked at Fiona with absolute, frantic desperation. Fi, please, let me explain. I didn't want to overwhelm you. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to me, and then away, like I was the sun and he couldn't bear the glare. We're estranged. She's got a lot of problems. Substance issues, financial trouble. I was just trying to help her out with a job tonight because she begged me. The pity vanished. It evaporated so fast it left a bitter, metallic taste on my tongue. Even now, caught dead to rights in a lie constructed of pure vanity, his first instinct was to throw me under the bus to pad his fall. He was trying to make me the charity case, the broken, volatile thing he was graciously tolerating out of the goodness of his wealthy heart. Our mother didn't play tennis, Colin, I said. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I just stated the facts, dropping them onto the table like heavy, unpolished stones. She didn't know what a clay court was. She died behind the register of a CVS pharmacy in Dayton, Ohio. She had varicose veins so bad they bled through her support hose if she stood for more than 6 hours. She smelled like cheap menthol cigarettes and store-brand hand lotion. Gemma, stop, Colin pleaded, his voice cracking. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The dam had broken. Our dad drove a forklift until he blew out 3 discs in his back. The pain pills stopped working, so he drank himself to death on bottom-shelf bourbon in a trailer that the bank took a week after his funeral. There was no estate. There was just me, at 19, selling the copper wire out of the walls to pay for his cremation. Fiona took a step back, physically recoiling. She bumped into the sleek credenza. She looked horrified. But it wasn't the lie that repulsed her. It was the ugly, pedestrian reality of the truth. I could see it in the slight flare of her nostrils, the way she pulled her silk wrap tighter around her shoulders. It was too gritty. It was the kind of poverty she only saw in documentaries, not in her dining room. Poverty was a contagion, and I was coughing all over her dinner party. Gemma, shut up, Colin hissed, his voice dropping into a venomous, panicked whisper. Just get out. You're ruining everything. I didn't ruin this, Colin, I said, reaching up to the back of my neck. I fumbled with the thick knot of the apron strings. It was pulled tight, damp with my sweat from the kitchen. You built a house out of wet paper, and you're mad at the draft. I yanked the strings. The knot gave way. I pulled the heavy black apron over my head, ruining my messy bun in the process. I didn't care. I dropped the apron over the back of an empty, minimalist dining chair. It hung there, a limp, dark flag of surrender. You owe me $3,000, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Colin stared at me. His mouth opened and closed. He looked like he wanted to lunge across the table and hit me. He looked like he wanted to curl into a ball and weep. He did neither. Colin, Harrison said. The heavy, gravelly authority of his voice broke the suffocating spell in the room. Pay your sister. Colin stood up. He moved stiffly, like a wooden marionette with half its strings cut. He walked over to the sleek entry table, opened a hidden drawer that slid out on silent, expensive tracks, and pulled out the thick, white envelope. He walked back to the dining area and held it out to me. He still wouldn't look at my face. He stared at a spot on the wall just over my left shoulder. I reached out and took the envelope. It was heavy. It was $3,000 in crisp, uncirculated hundreds. It was rent. It was a new transmission for my rattling car. It was 3 months of not having a panic attack before swiping my debit card at the grocery store. The paper felt thick and textured, and it felt utterly disgusting in my hand. But I wasn't going to leave it behind. I had cooked that steak to a perfect 135 degrees. I had swallowed my pride. I had earned every single filthy cent. I turned to Harrison. He was still watching me, his expression unreadable. The dessert is a Meyer lemon tart, I told him, slipping back into the only roll that made sense to me. It's in the fridge. The crust will get soggy if you leave it in there past 10 o'clock. Harrison gave me a single, slow nod, a strange mark of respect from a man whose entire career was built on dismantling liars. Understood, Gemma. Thank you for the meal. I didn't look at Fiona. I didn't look back at Colin. I just turned and walked down the long, sterile hallway. The air in the apartment felt thin, suffocating, completely devoid of oxygen. I pressed the call button for the service elevator. The doors slid open with a depressing industrial groan, revealing scratched metal walls, flickering fluorescent overheads, and the lingering chemical smell of industrial floor wax. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, finally cutting off the view of Colin's perfect, shattered penthouse, my knees gave out just a fraction. I leaned back heavily against the cold steel wall of the cab. I gripped the envelope so hard my fingernails bit into my palms, turning my knuckles white. I was shaking now, a violent, full-body tremor. The adrenaline was rapidly draining from my system, leaving behind a profound, hollow ache in my chest that felt like an actual physical injury. I had my brother back for exactly 3 hours tonight, and I had lost him forever before we even served dessert. The elevator hit the ground floor with a jarring thud. I pushed through the heavy metal service doors and walked out into the damp, heavy air of the city night. The contrast was a physical blow, the smell of exhaust, roasting nuts from a street cart, rotting garbage in the alleyway, and wet asphalt washed over me. It was aggressively loud. A siren wailed a few blocks away, an angry, rising screech. A cab honked relentlessly at an intersection. The air wasn't climate-controlled. It wasn't citrus-scented or perfect. I stopped on the sidewalk and took a massive, shuddering breath, letting the chaotic, filthy air fill my lungs until they burned. I shoved the thick envelope deep into the pocket of my cheap, frayed thrift store coat. I put my head down, merged into the stream of strangers on the pavement, and started the long walk toward the subway. Sometimes, the heaviest price we pay isn't monetary, it's the quiet erasure of who we are just to make someone else comfortable in their own lies. Walking away that night, the cash in my pocket felt heavy, but leaving that toxic room felt like breathing for the first time in years. If you've ever had to shrink yourself to fit someone else's narrative, or if you know the painful cost of walking away from family to protect your peace, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more raw, unfiltered realities.